Good morning, everybody. This event will start in 1 minute.
Ian.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this special behaviour change briefing event. My name is Ben Caspers. I'm the founder and managing director of Claremont. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this special event, one that we're part of a series that we're having on a range of issues. Today, we'll be asking, how can behaviour change communications help with cancer screening and diagnosis? This is a critical moment for cancer care in the UK and in fact around the world. The NHS has a major cancer recovery job on its hands as a result of the pandemic. From March 2020 to February 2021, 369,000 fewer people than expected were referred to a specialist with suspected cancer in England, leading to an estimated 19,500 fewer diagnoses. Our question for today is, how can behaviour change communications make a difference? We'll be hearing from leading cancer and behaviour change communications experts about what works in driving improved response to cancer screening invitations and in supporting efforts to speed up diagnosis. We're going to start with 3 short presentations, followed by a panel event, a panel discussion, where we'll be very pleased to take your questions. Please put your questions in as we're going using the Q&A button below. If you've not already done so, please now go to the chat button also below and say hello, tell us where you're from, and tell us what you would like to get out of the event. I've got 2 of my esteemed colleagues next to me who are going to be scanning the chat and the Q&A and feeding through nuggets to me. And if you tell us what you're looking for from the event, we can hopefully gear some of the panel questions to get you answers. Now to introduce our speakers. We have got Jodie Moffat. Can you give us a wave, Jodie? Where are you? There, thank you, Jodie. Jodie is the Early Diagnosis Programme Lead and Head of Strategic Evidence at Cancer Research UK. Jodie will today summarise the behavioural barriers to screening and diagnosis, identifying those that the pandemic has reinforced and new barriers that the pandemic has introduced. She's going to share her insights from the last 2 years, her thoughts on the shifts the NHS and others may need to take both now and over the longer term. Is that a thumbs up from Jodie? Have I got that right? Well, we'll find out in a short while. You're going to do your presentation. We will then have Nasser Turabi, was previously the Managing Director of, thank you for the wave, Nasser, previously Managing Director of the North Central London Cancer Alliance until October of this year, and is now the Director of Cancer Intelligence and Implementation at Cancer Research UK. Nasser has vast experience as an NHS manager, spanning strategy, transformation, operations, performance, a whole lot more. We're very fortunate to have Nasser with us today. Nasser's going to be presenting alongside my colleague, Emily Davis. Emily, give us the obligatory wave. And they will be talking us through a campaign that the North Central London Cancer Alliance ran in 2021 that encouraged people with cancer symptoms to present to primary care earlier and to respond to screening invitations that they received. That will be the second presentation of our three. The third one is with Sarah Hyam. Sarah will be alongside my colleague Ian. And Sarah is the Director of Cancer Intelligence at GRAIL. That's the company behind the Gallery blood test that can detect more than 50 types of cancer, often before the symptoms appear. Alongside Ian, Sarah's going to talk us through the campaign that GRAIL launched in September 2021 with NHS England, King's College London and 8 cancer alliances. And that campaign aimed to recruit 140,000 volunteers to the NHS Gallery trial. We'll get the talk through that case study. Plus, we've got our panel discussion after that. We're very lucky to be joined also by Dr. Jo Waller. Jo, hello. Jo is a reader in the Cancer Prevention Group at King's College London, where Jo leads a behavioural science team. Jo is also a visiting professor in the Department of Behavioural Science and Health at UCL. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to this amazing group of people, and also to the 200 people across the country, and in fact across the world, who have registered for this event. I can already see in our participant list that we have got 100 people already on with us now. So no pressure, we're going to go to our first speaker. I'm going to ask Jodie please to share screen and to begin the presentations. Jodie, would you like to share screen now and check that your sound's working all right?
Good morning, everyone. Let me just check this is working. Put it on. There we go. That should be full screen for you.
That looks great. Thank you, Jodie.
Right.
You well. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jodie Moffat. I work at Cancer Research UK, as Ben has outlined, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak with so many of you today. I've already seen some familiar names in the participant list, so hi to you and hi to all the new faces too. So I'm just going to be setting out a little bit about the case for early diagnosis, which I think will be familiar to many of you, but we'll just spend a bit of time on that. And then move on to think specifically about public behaviour and the role of that in securing improved cancer outcomes, a little bit of the insights we've been gathering and the work that's been happening, both recently, but also looking back over a decade or more, and then to end on some of the things that I think need to be really thought through and acted upon to achieve impact here. So, as I say, probably really no surprise to so many of you on the call today, but when cancer is diagnosed at an earlier stage, the chances of survival are so much better. And you can see that really clearly articulated on this graph on the left, which is survival by stage. And you can see that actually for some cancers, there's a pattern whereby survival gets worse progressively as you go through these stages to advanced stage 4. And for other cancers, there's a slightly different pattern where actually it probably holds its own for a little bit around 1, 2, 3, but then it drops off a cliff at 4. So really just spelling out why it's so crucial that we diagnose cancer at an earlier stage, and particularly why we avoid stage 4 cancer diagnoses. So that's the why, but of course, the really challenging issue is that we are in a situation whereby tens of thousands of people are diagnosed with late stage cancer each year. The graph on the right are data from England for 2018. 2019 data are now available. They've just recently come out. So we'll be updating this slide, but really the pattern won't be shifting all that much. We have some cancers where we're able to see quite a good stage distribution, and some cancers achieving quite a lot of early stage disease, but then so many cancers where that is a very, very different story. And as I say, tens of thousands of people who are in a situation where their chances of survival are really poor. So what goes into cancer diagnosis and what affects what stage of cancer is diagnosed at the time? So a range of different factors, a myriad, and we've got the tumour factors, things about the disease, its specific origins, how it evolves, how it changes over time. That's one category. We've also got the patient factors, and we've got the service and system factors. And we've tried to capture those latter in particular, the more patient and service factors in this NADI hypothesis, which you will see was from 2015, and one of our fellow speakers on the panel today, Zara Hyam, who came up with this working with colleagues for the British Journal of Cancer supplement back in 2015. So it summarises just a range of different factors that are at play here. And also, of course, presents opportunities to intervene, steps that we might take in order to try and shift the way that cancer is diagnosed and hopefully change that outcome for people. This image on the right here is just trying to capture those different intervention points in really summary form, and trying to articulate that actually if we're able to change the way cancer is diagnosed, perhaps bringing more diagnoses through a screening route, securing earlier times and timely help seeking from the public, we might be able to achieve an early stage diagnosis, so stage 1 or 2, we would hope. If you act further on in the pathway, you might not be in a position to secure early stage diagnosis, such as stage 1, maybe even stage 2, but you should be able to make a benefit and to achieve earlier stage diagnosis. And if you recall to the previous slide, if we're able to reduce that stage 4 diagnosis in particular, then we really should be able to give people a positive outcome, assuming that we can ensure they get those access to the treatments. So this, I think, will be familiar, hopefully, to, again, many of you on the call. This is our recently redesigned Cancer Research UK Early Diagnosis Waterfall, which gives an idea of all of the different things that we think have the potential to contribute to stage shift. And the key message for us, of course, here is that there is no single thing that's going to achieve stage shift. There are a range of different things at play here, but it really just highlights the potential opportunity, both of those things within our current toolkit, things we know now and we should be acting on more quicker and better, but also the opportunity that there is and the need that there is for further research in order to identify those innovations and developments of the future. But of course, we've had COVID, and all of these things which we think are so important and can contribute to stage shift for cancer have been impacted through the pandemic. There have been some positive impacts. We've seen some innovations in pathways and some speeding up of certain types of research, but largely overall, the impact of COVID has been negative. So the progress that we had been making beforehand may well have stalled, and it becomes even more imperative that we redouble our efforts and coordinate our activities in order to drive improvements together. And just to pick up, I know Ben began at the beginning with some numbers here, but the impact of COVID on cancer diagnosis really is borne out in numbers. Whether we will see the full impact in numbers in the future remains to be seen, because I think there are so many different contributing factors to that. But in the first year of the pandemic, almost 45,000 fewer cancer patients started treatment than we had been anticipating. And while there have been increases and improvements in numbers of monthly patients starting treatment, there are still significant concerns that we haven't seen all those patients that have need come through into the system. And indeed, some of those patients may well never make it through at all. The likely contributing factors are many and varied. We saw, for example, an official or de facto pauses in cancer screening. We saw impact on how people were responding to symptoms, really changes in how people were engaging with primary care, how primary care were responding, what they had access to, and all the way through into diagnosis and diagnostics. So a whole range of different contributing factors there. But to really pick up on the focus of today's session, I'm just going to be picking up on delayed help seeking in particular and sharing a little bit about what we've been doing in that area. So we have been monitoring and keeping an eye on barriers to help seeking for over a decade, usually via what is called our cancer awareness measure. This is a snapshot of a piece of work that we did in conjunction with Cardiff University, and data from last August, September time. This, as you can see, is picking up on some of the barriers. So there are some people who didn't report any barriers to seeking help the last time that they had a symptom that they thought might need attention. But we have seen that there are people who were endorsing barriers, and these barriers are actually fairly similar over time. being worried about wasting the healthcare professionals' time, not wanting to be seen to make a fuss. We also have more recent time points for this data, again, working with Cardiff in a time point from kind of February earlier this year, and more recently a piece of work Cancer Research UK has done with data from September. Now, these barriers have tended to be fairly stable. Not wanting to be seen to make a fuss, concern about wasting professionals' time does seem to have still continue to be a factor. We are also getting hints that some more practical barriers are coming into play here around difficulty getting an appointment. And also, we've been very interested to see that actually perhaps there's been a slight shift in people's concerns about getting coronavirus, and perhaps maybe people's concerns about that, particularly in the primary care setting, may well have been shifting over time, potentially reducing. As well as thinking about the barriers, we also look at the prompts for help seeking, very much recognising, for those of you who come from a sociological background, the whole concept of illness iceberg, and that actually having a symptom is the norm rather than the exception, and actually seeking help becomes the exception. So most people have symptoms that they just never come to the attention of a health professional. So understanding these prompts is useful, and there has been relative stability in these prompts over time. We have introduced a new item for this question in September, and I think the findings of that will be quite interesting. I'm just going to leave you with that as a teaser, and it might be a reason for me to come back again in the future at some point. So this idea that we saw in the barriers about people being concerned about wasting the doctor's time, not wanting to be seen to make a fuss, these have been insights that have been very much on the agenda and radar of national stakeholders as they've sought to try and encourage people to come to their GP in a timely fashion. And here you've got excerpts and examples from the England Be Clear on Cancer programme, which has largely tried to secure symptomatic presentation, but there have also been screening campaigns too. But they have often put the GP front and centre of the campaigns in order to support that justification and people feeling validated. And insight and robust testing has been really at the key of these campaigns, and also very much thinking about evaluation and having a plan for that up front, looking both at campaign metrics, so whether it's getting through, whether people are seeing it, whether it seems to be shifting awareness, whether it seems to be shifting behaviour. And it's been really difficult, surprisingly difficult, to capture objective GP attendance data linked to these campaigns, and indeed, just as general, it's an important metric to have. But what we have seen generally is that they have been getting through, they have been increasing awareness, and they have been prompting behaviour change in terms of GP attendance. But impact on later stage clinical metrics is variable. And it may be that these campaigns aren't making a difference, or it may be that they are making a difference. It's just that our evaluation methods aren't able to detect that. And of course, we also have to allow for that. What we hope from these campaigns is that there will be a halo effect. So while they might not be immediately relevant to people, they will actually be something that people will remember should they find themselves faced with a symptom in the future and heed that advice. I would say, having been involved in the Be Clear on Cancer programme as a stakeholder for since it started essentially, so a decade, that interested in this area and in engaging with the public had been waning over time. But with the pandemic, I think we've seen a real shift there. It really highlighted that people were shifting their behaviour. They were not coming forward for a whole range of reasons, not least because they were encouraged to stay at home. And the NHS very quickly tried to mitigate some of that impact through its awareness campaigns. And here we've got examples from England and the Help Us Help You brand, which has sought to talk about a range of different symptoms, as well as lung cancer related symptoms and symptoms related to urological cancers, because of the impact that has been keenly felt in those areas. We've also seen activity in Scotland. And at the bottom right here, you'll also see examples of work that Cancer Research UK has been doing in Wales, and also we're planning some work in Northern Ireland, as well as national UK-wide activity. all very much trying to encourage and support the public to come forward, and always mindful that we need to do that as responsibly as possible because of the very real challenges that exist within the service. We have been encouraged by the reception that our activity has had, and the evaluations are ongoing, but by and large, in terms of action reported, normally about 20% of respondents report that they had taken action as a result of seeing the campaign. Not all of that will be help seeking. Some of that will be talking to friends or family, maybe to another source of information or health advice. So, as I said, I'd have said pre-pandemic, the interest in engaging with the public was waning. But I think the pandemic has been, in some ways, a very useful reminder that if you do not engage with the public, if you do not have the services available for them to come into, if you do not encourage them to do so, then all of your efforts that you might be putting in at any point downstream will be null and void, essentially, and you will not deliver the outcomes for patients that are needed. So going forward, we absolutely need to be thinking in a programme way here. This is about impact over time, coming up with a plan, being led by data and need and insight, and ensuring that there is appropriate levels of funding in place in order to deliver that. We need to find a way of doing that in a way that engages with the local and regional teams who are really, really trying to drive improvements for their communities and are sometimes doing their own work. There is a risk that there's duplication and wasted effort there. So how can we do more to coordinate that, share good practice, and make it easier and drive faster impact? We need to continue to tailor our approaches, making sure that we're reaching our audiences in a way that's meaningful to them and that we're layering it up. There was a time when I think people thought mass media was very broad brush. I think actually things have gone a long way on that, and we can be very tailored with mass media. We can buy it according to areas, according to groups, but that does not neglect the opportunities to layer up through communities and through engaging on the ground. With that, there's a huge opportunity for national stakeholders to come together with the cancer community, including the third sector community, such as charities, and also the broader networks, community networks that people who we're wanting to reach, wanting to help, wanting to support are working with already in order to help ensure that we are getting those messages out there and working in a way that works for the people we're trying to speak to. We need to make sure that we are helping to reduce inequalities rather than adding to them. And we need to make sure that there is a service that has support. So meaning that the health service needs time to plan for these campaigns, it needs the capacity in place. And that helps with ensuring that the people who are encouraged to come forward get the most positive reception possible and are not deterred from seeking help again in the future. And we really need to ensure that there is long-term commitments, making sure that the NHS and the UK more broadly can deliver world-class cancer outcomes, so that we can be making sure that decisions about which campaigns run and when are based on what is needed in terms of patients and cancer, and not in terms of what the system is in a position to deliver. So that's it for me. I will hand back to Ben, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you very much. It's so useful to get a high-level view like that, and in particular to see what you put on the last slide with the 7 requirements really for doing things better locally and in a tailored way. And I'm hopeful that our next speakers, which is NASA with my colleague Emily, will be able to give an example of that. In the introductions, I didn't introduce also Fanta Bojang, who is going to be taking part in the panel event instead of NASA. Hello, Fanta. Sorry about that, Fanta. I didn't mean to miss you out, because Fanta's got a huge amount of experience working in London with cancer alongside Emily and NASA, and we're very fortunate to have you here. So we look forward to getting Fanta's input during the panel event after the speakers. NASA, if you'd like to share screen now, or is it Emily who's got the share screen? Well, Emily's got the share screen. Go ahead And I will go on to mute and you can begin.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nasser Tarabi. I'm the, well, I was the director of the North Central London Cancer Alliance. And I think just before I start, I should say that I was heavily involved in this project, but the people who really did it were Emily and the team at Claremont, and Fanta, who's on the panel, and also Catherine Nestor, who's one of the participants today. So just to let everyone know that I don't want to take the credit for all of this. So if you go on to the next slide, Emily, so we'll just dive straight into it. So really good to see that high level overview from Jodie, and really the rooting in the evidence and the history. And so this doesn't come out of nowhere. So, but we're going to give a very local view just now. So these two lines, the blue line is 2019 suspected cancer referrals to hospital, and the orange line is 2020, starting in April each year, the financial year. And as you can see, I mean, COVID was already in full swing by the beginning of April, and we saw about a 70% drop in suspected cancer referrals. So what that means is fewer people being referred for diagnosis in hospital, as most of you on this call will understand. And you actually see the whole timeline of the worst of the pandemic, and actually it was a lot better in the second surge, and there were a lot of reasons for that. And I think, you know, health services knew a lot more about infection control, but also the messaging was much better. So I think about the summer after the first wave, and we understood much more about infection control, we started to think about commissioning cancer awareness programs like this, which ended up in this Claremont project to help address this. Go to the next slide, Emily. Now, the treatment shortfall that Jodie referred to, this is the treatment shortfall that we were tracking month to month in North Central London. This has got a bit better since when this chart was taken, but this was the concern that we were addressing, this big, you know, comparison between last year's average number of treatments and what we were doing this year. And there are a number of reasons for this, but part of that was this issue around people not going to their GP. And that's the bit that we wanted to address, or attending the screening programs, which of course have paused for quite a few months. So if you go to the next slide, Emily. So our overall objectives, of course, included early diagnosis, but also reducing health inequalities. And we were quite concerned that the effect of the pandemic would be to make those people who are less likely to seek help, or less likely to get a referral even, make the situation even worse for them. So it had to be central to our approach. So we really wanted to focus on those two areas, so screening, attendance, and suspected cancer referrals. And we recognize this is a really complex picture, many different factors. So, you know, actually not just concerns about infection control, but there actually were infection control issues in hospitals. And especially early on, we really didn't know whether coming into hospital was safe, certainly the first couple of months or so. And the big drop in April, I think, was to some degree unavoidable, you know, given the information that we had at that time. But as things got better, we absolutely knew that we needed to recover this really quickly. We did some work deciding where we were going to focus as well. So we had tumor specific information. And so we looked at those tumors with the biggest drop in referrals and those with the screening programs. So we ended up with the focusing on the screening program tumors. So of course, breast, cervical and bowel, but also lung, lower GI cancers, where we were really concerned that there'd been a big drop in referrals, but also that the cancers progressed quickly enough and the delays were going to have the biggest impact. So I'm going to hand over to Emily now to talk about what we actually did.
Thanks, Nasser. So I'll just start with a little bit of context around you know, what we needed to know before we started. And Jodie's actually done me a favour here, I think, because you've gone through a lot of the barriers already. But we just, we knew that with the really diverse population that there is across North Central London, there was a variation in knowledge gap, there were different kinds of emotional barriers, there were different kinds of practical barriers, and there was this COVID context, which was, fear around safety of going into primary care, and people who already knew that it was difficult to get an appointment with a GP for other things. So we had to take that into consideration when we were developing the campaign. And then, of course, like I said, it's a really diverse population. So there are cultural and generational variations across all of these. So what we did was we took a kind of 4 key principled approach. The first one was leverage the Help Us Help You campaign. You'll be very familiar with that. It was ongoing at the time, and we wanted to make sure that we capitalized on any recognition that there might be for that campaign amongst the audiences that we were targeting. We wanted to localize the messaging to make it relevant for the North Central London audience. And I should say, actually, for anyone who's not from London, North Central London is it's 5 boroughs: Haringey, Barnet, Enfield, Camden and Islington.
Yeah, about 1.5 million people.
And then, we wanted to localize it to the North Central London population to make it relevant. We had very much a partnership focus. So this was about partnership working with healthcare services, as well as partnership working with community and voluntary services, because we wanted to leave a legacy. We didn't want this to be flash in the pan kind of work. And then the other sort of principle that we threaded through right from the beginning was about honesty, because we couldn't ignore this, the fact that there's a pandemic going on and what we're asking you to do is difficult. We wanted to be honest about that from the outset with all of our partners, because that helps you build trust. So this is what our creative looked like. So, it will be familiar to you. So we were leveraging the national campaign. We engaged healthcare professionals from primary and secondary care, and NASA will speak more about this, but there was a lot of goodwill and people who wanted to get involved and wanted to put themselves as faces of this campaign and get behind it. And then we also got ambassadors from local communities who had the experience and had engaged in the behaviours that we were asking people, we were encouraging people to do themselves. And so, and you can see this just to show you that we wanted to make sure that right from the outset within the messaging, we're acknowledging that what we're asking you to do is tricky. And this again is about kind of just promoting honesty throughout the campaign. So what did it look like? This is kind of the campaign in a nutshell. It's basically local faces, honest messages. We did some traditional advertising. There was a lot of message and material dissemination across the patch. But what we're going to look at in more detail is this community partnership work that we did, because that's where the legacy begins, really. So we had a really wide range of organisations. We had small organisations like the African Health Forum, which is it's an umbrella organisation that is based in, I forget always which borough it's in. It's in one of the boroughs. But they're an umbrella organisation, and their remit is promote better health outcomes for African communities. And then we had organisations like Manor Gardens, which is a charity that's based in Islington. And their mission is to help people take action to change their lives for the better. So there are already lots of people out there who are doing what we wanted to do. And what we did is we gave them a lot of support right from the beginning and training. We linked them up with each other. So it wasn't just about what could we learn from them in terms of how do we deliver these messages to the community. We wanted to make sure that they also could learn from each other, because that would make the activity that go on much richer. So we linked them with each other because we wanted to make sure that that they could help each other as well as help us and share ideas. And what I'll hold that for a second, because the point that I think is really important to make is we made the how. We very much left the how up to them in terms of how do you deliver these messages to your community. We tooled them up as well as we could with the kind of materials that they needed, translated materials, audiovisual materials, printed materials. But in terms of how you get the messages into the hands of your communities, we very much wanted them to have autonomy about that. because these people who work in these organizations, they're passionate, they're experienced, they know what works, they know how sensitive they need to be or how sensitive they don't need to be, and they know what to do. So what we ended up with is a really wide variety of engagement techniques, basically. We had one-to-one info and advice sessions. We had face-to-face group sessions. We had small online events that were geared around discussing the issue. We had online events where consultants were invited to give a talk and then have a Q&A. We had materials flying around all over the place, and there was our materials and stories and messages and videos plastered all over their social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So there was a lot of activity, and a range of activity that we never wanted to prescribe at the beginning. We wanted to leave it up to the community organisations to say, this is what's best going to work with our community. So what are the results, I hear you cry? And Jodie alluded to this a bit. Effectively, measuring the outcomes of behaviour change campaigns is difficult. It's a holy grail that we don't always manage to dig up, I think. But what we do know is that community work at this level and the kind of stuff that these organisations were doing, it does work. And if you take the stages of change model, it's quite a useful model to apply when you're working with complex and sensitive issues, like, you know, if you've got a lump in a sensitive area and you need to go to the doctor, because what's required to get somebody to take action varies and depends very much on the individual. So you could take cervical screening, for example. You might have Zara, who has never heard of cervical screening, doesn't know if her friends do it, has never talked about it, doesn't talk to her family about it, gets the invitation letter. She's probably not very likely to go. And then you might have Maria, who's much older, who had a bad experience once. She knows what cervical screening is. She knows exactly why she should go and why it's important, but has been putting it off. And those are two women who need an intervention, but they need very different interventions and they need very different strengths of messaging. So what the stages of change model helps us to do, I think, is see that success isn't only about when the call to action is taken up, because quite often there are stages that you've got to go through before you get there. And sometimes an intervention is required to start the process of thinking about the call to action. And this, I think, is the beauty of working with community organisations who are embedded in their communities, because they know where to start on this wheel. They know on a really micro individual level what to say to who, when, and they can and they will carry on having those conversations and shunting people around the wheel if you tool them up to be able to do that work properly. And since we've finished working with on this campaign, the feedback that we've got from the organisations that we've worked with shows that people are doing it. People are going to the doctor. People are reporting to their campaign ambassadors. I've been to the doctor. People in the organisations themselves have said the campaign, you know, it gave me courage. We've had women go along with each other to their cervical screening appointments to get over the kind of fear that was there before. And we've got some really, really, really compelling case studies, like this lady, Mary, who went to an event at the African Health Forum in May, where she participated in a survey. There was a discussion. And in July, she recognised that she had symptoms that she'd learned about. She was worried. She went to the doctor, and luckily, if it's lucky, really, it's not lucky to get a urinary infection, but there's worse things that you can have. And so she got antibiotics, her scan was clear, and she's okay. And then Kofi was another case study that the African Health Forum sent through to us. And he's somebody who went to an event. He'd been worried about his symptoms. He went to the doctor, and it turned out that he did have cancer. And luckily, they're saying that it's at the early stages and they're confident that they can help him. So we are, you know, pleased to see that, really, I suppose is all I can say. Just before I give you back to NASA, we just want to leave you with a couple of things that we think are really important when you're using your behaviour change comms to give to people, really, to deliver interventions. You want to be honest. You want to tell the truth about what it takes to do what you're asking. That's where it all starts. you've got to tool up the right messages, because we all listen to people we know. You've got to have some kind of gift ready. It's not just about, you know, providing funding. Funding is usually people will say that you don't give them enough money, but there are other ways that you can add value. And what we did is we gave them training by Cancer Research UK for as many people within the organizations who wanted to do it. And then the final thing is you have to dig the deep foundations. This takes time. You need to do a lot of work at the beginning. You need to build strong relationships and make sure that you are investing in the people who you're asking to do your job for you. And this upfront investment, it will go a long way, because we're walking away now, but these people are still doing this job. So back to you, Nasser.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm going to give a few reflections really on, I think, what the important things from, I guess, a NHS and Cancer Alliance point of view as well. So, you know, we were doing this during, well, in fact, we delayed the campaign because of the second surge in the winter. And it was really important to have that ongoing conversation with other stakeholders in the NHS. So really preparing the acute providers and keeping that conversation going. And we tangibly delayed because we were concerned that actually the hospitals wouldn't be able to cope with extra demand. General practice in the UK has been under so much pressure during COVID, and that pressure continues. And we were just starting the vaccination program as well. And so there were a lot of concerns about, you know, are we just going to stimulate loads of unwarranted demand? And whether GPs would have the capacity, and really making sure that we weren't doing something that was actually going to decrease trust in the NHS. And so having those conversations, so myself and actually general practice colleagues with special interest in cancer went and talked to GPs repeatedly, actually, about those missing cancers, engaging them on what they could do to help. And they know very well what their duties and responsibilities are, and they're expert in this. But making sure that they felt involved so that it wasn't a surprise. I think this point that Emily referred to, there was around our specialist community. So the specialist cancer doctors of various kinds and clinicians of various kinds. So we really enlisted them. There was so much demand, actually much more demand than we could cater for. There's a lot of willingness. And in fact, a lot of those people, you know, had you know, ethnic and family origins in the communities that we were particularly trying to reach. They speak community languages, and I think that was really important. But we were also kind of making bridging, you know, between what is frankly quite an ivory tower, even if it is potentially quite diverse in central London, of, you know, cancer specialists and local communities. And although it's north central London and includes places like Hampstead and Primrose Hill, it also includes some of the poorest areas in the UK too, in, you know, Islington and Haringey and Enfield. So it's really important to make those bridges. And this point about being in it for the long term, I think, was incredibly important for me. I mean, in fact, COVID provided an opportunity to do this kind of investment, which wasn't typical really for a Cancer Alliance to do. And I think the cost effectiveness of doing this kind of thing will really benefit from those relationships. So being able to work with local organizations, having done this upfront work, I think will be cumulative. And, you know, that point that Emily made about moving people around that cycle of in terms of their kind of propensity to attend, propensity to have positive health seeking behaviors, I think will be really benefited by this work. So big thank you to everyone in the Cancer Alliance team and Claremont who delivered this, but particularly in those voluntary sector organisations and all the clinicians and all the other people who got involved too. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser and Emily, and must acknowledge as well as you did, Fanta, Catherine and the wider team. We're going to hear a little bit from Fanta in a moment. Very helpfully, a rubbish truck has just pulled up outside my window, so I hope you can hear me okay. We're going to move on to our third final presentation, which will be with Sarah and Ian. Ian, if you'd like to share screen, we'll proceed with that.
Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me. I'm Sarah Hyam. I am, as Ben said, the Director of Cancer Intelligence at Grail, which is a healthcare company that has just developed a UK arm in the middle of last year. And I joined Grail from Cancer Research UK, having spent 20 years at Cancer Research UK last October. So Grail has developed a blood test which has the potential to be able to detect over 50 different types of cancer in the blood before symptoms appear. And so what we're going to spend the next few minutes talking to you about is the setup and the use of behaviour change, comms and theory in the setup of this trial, which is to test the effectiveness of the Gallery test in an NHS screening population. Next slide, please, Ian. I very briefly just have to share this disclaimer. I know people are very anxious to see and share slides. I've taken out really any contentious or highly confidential information from my slides, but I am duty bound to show this because we are obviously a commercial entity testing a test in the NHS. And so just need to stipulate that the information that we're sharing with you about the trial is for educational purposes. Thanks, Ian. So Jodie gave us a fantastic background and outline of the situation for cancer early and late diagnosis across the UK. And I just wanted to re-emphasize one point really here with this slide, which is obviously screening offers us one of the best ways in which to detect cancer at the earliest stages, because screening is offered to ostensibly well people that don't have symptoms. And obviously we have 3 screening programs in the UK at the moment for colorectal, breast and cervical screening. But unsurprisingly, because we don't screen for the vast majority of cancers, the greatest proportion of cancer deaths are in cancers for which we do not screen currently. Hence, we are hopeful that the potential of a test like Gallery that has the ability to pick up 50 different types of cancer in one blood draw, if you like, could help to change the face of this, and we could start to see in the future fewer people dying unnecessarily from a late stage diagnosis. Next stage, please. Next slide, please, Ian. Just a quick word then about how the Gallery test works. From taking a blood test from an individual, the test is able to detect changes in the methylation pattern of, if we could just go back a slide, please, Ian. We seem to have jumped forward one.
Sorry.
Thank you. It detects changes in the methylation patterns of cell-free DNA, which is shed into the bloodstream from tumours, wherever they may be in the body. And tumours have a tendency to do this even at their earlier stages. Now, more cfDNA, cell-free DNA, is shed into the blood as tumours progress. So they do become more detectable as they grow. But the potential of this test is not only to be able to detect a cancer signal in the blood, but also from the shape of that pattern, if you like, it's able to give information about whereabouts in the body that cancer is located. And at the moment, the version of the test that we have has 21 different cancer signal origins, these CSO sites that indicate a different part of the body, where the investigating physician is then able to look for the cancer. Next slide, please, Ian. So we have a whole range of partners really involved in this trial, which is a randomized controlled trial across various alliances in England to test the efficacy of this test, as I said, as a screening tool. Grail, as I've said, is the company that developed the test in the first place. its main headquarters are in California in the States. And as I've said, we now have Grail Bio UK, which is the UK arm, which is running this trial alongside the NHS. And it's very much a partnership between Grail and the NHS, as you will see from the further slides. And the CR UK and King's College London Cancer Prevention Trials Unit is actually running the study. So this is the independent academic unit based at King's College London that is running the entire trial for us through mobile units, which Ian will go on to talk about. So the next slide, please. So I mentioned that we are running across certain areas of the UK, of England, and we selected 8 cancer alliances that we hoped would offer the best opportunities for trying to reach very diverse populations in our trial. So in order to have 140,000 people consenting into our trial, and we have the ambition of recruiting these, in fact, the need to recruit these inside a year, we are going to be having to send out about 1 million invitations in order to get that number of people coming forward. And as I'm sure you're all aware, invitations to join medical trials is fraught with the same dangers as invitations to join screening. So the same types of people are more likely to take up an invitation to join a trial as will take up an invitation to be screened, to have a health intervention. But we are really working, as you will hear from Ian, very hard to ensure that we have good population representativeness in our trial. And these are the alliance regions that were selected in order to help us get there. Next slide, please. So what were the main objectives that we had for our behaviour change communications? Well, essentially, initially, obviously to raise awareness of the trial and why it is so important to get recruitment and retention of those participants across all the variations of social, ethnic and geographic mix. And we talk about retention because this trial isn't just a simple one-off blood test. Participants are invited to come back twice more at 12 months and 24 months for subsequent screens. So we are effectively testing 3 annual screens of this test. We want to ensure that stakeholders feel informed and engaged, and that they can trust, obviously, the information that they're getting. And we also want to ensure that those that we're working with across the NHS, who will effectively be seeing those that come from the trial that have a cancer signal detected, that they themselves feel informed and engaged, and there are no surprises. And obviously, involving both primary and secondary care in this has been key. And then finally, obviously, we do need to build and protect the reputation of the trial to ensure that it feels trustworthy and all the partners are involved are seen as valid partners in this trial so that participants can feel reassured. Next slide, please, Ian. So just to reiterate then, the key audiences, I mean, first and foremost, clearly it's our potential participants for the trial. As I've said, around 1 million invitations we'll be having to send out in order to get 140,000 people participating and consenting in the trial. We are targeting this at the general usual screening age, so people over the age of 50 and up to 77, because as I've said, people will be coming back twice more after their initial screen for tests, so that by the time they have their final screen, they are still within their 70s. Health professionals are absolutely crucial to this, and that's why working with the Cancer Alliances has been so important to us, as well as obviously working with the wider stakeholders, partnerships at community and local level, and key opinion leaders who will be ultimately making the decisions about the further potential rollout of this trial. Next slide, please, Ian. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Ian, who is the director at Claremont, with whom we've been working with on our behaviour change communications.
Thanks, Sarah. Just before I get going, I apologise in advance if I sound a little croaky. I've got a slight sore throat today, but I'll do my best to get through without coughing. It says, I'll clear my throat to start. So yeah, so all of our communications work on this project has been founded on audience research that we did early this year. And I'm going to talk through the work that Claremont led, but it's worth mentioning as well that additional depth interviews were also done by colleagues at King's, including Joe, who's with us and might want to comment on that later on. We initially did focus groups among 40 respondents from a range of backgrounds to understand attitudes to the test and the trial, including their motivations, barriers, information needs, and perceptions of risks associated with taking part. And the sample for that research was skewed towards underrepresented groups, so those from a sort of C2DE, socioeconomic groups, and ethnic minority backgrounds. We later followed up with further public focus groups and depth interviews with Cancer Alliance leaders to explore the name of the study, the branding, and key messages. And we learned a huge amount from this work, but the main insights we took away can be summarized into 3 positives and 2 watchouts. So start with the positives. So overall, the test and the trial were received very positively. The test is seen as a hugely valuable and exciting innovation on something really important that touches most people's lives. So this was driving very high motivation amongst most people to participate. But it was evident we needed to work hard with some to provide very clear details about exactly what would happen to sustain this motivation. Unsurprisingly, the NHS's involvement added trust and credibility, and people were highly motivated by messaging that highlighted their opportunity to help the NHS save lives. And we also saw that where we elevated messaging that spelt out clearly exactly who was eligible, i.e. the age range and the fact that it needed to be people who hadn't had cancer in the last 3 years, that increased salience. It acted as a signal for people to pay more attention, and since it was obvious that this was relevant for them. However, on those watchouts, so the high motivation we saw was tempered to some extent by fear and anxiety, especially related to what happens to a participant if a cancer signal is detected. People disliked the uncertainty connected to this, so we knew we needed to preempt this and be very clear about next steps, including explaining the referral pathway and the priority the NHS would give to such referrals. Many also found the trial design hard to understand, especially the role and value of the control group. So we needed to ensure participant content explained the why, not just the what, behind how the trial would operate, to minimize the risk of participants perceiving being randomized to the control group as an inferior outcome, which could impact retention. So we used these insights to develop a message framework which articulated the what, why, who, and how of the study, with an overarching proposition, which was let's detect cancer early. In doing this, we drew not just on what we'd heard from our focus groups and interviews, but also from behavioural theory. So for example, the NHS needs your help was a line that works in part because of the reciprocity effect. It's a social norm to respond to a positive action with another positive action. And since many feel they owe something back to the NHS, particularly post-COVID, that language tested well. People also tend to seek to be part of things that contribute to a sense of purpose and bigger meaning. So it was important to clearly state the potential impact of the trial and the public's role in helping achieve it. We also considered the appropriate tone of voice for delivering these messages. We wanted to be bold and optimistic, yet also straight talking and humble. We also tested a range of names for the study, and this is where we can demonstrate the weight we placed in the audience research we did, because both the public and the Cancer Alliances who we spoke to, they rejected the 3 names that were originally considered, and we listened. People told us they wanted something straightforward that was relevant to the trial's purpose, not too abstract. And the ultimate name that was chosen, which was NHS Gallery, was a joint decision between Grail and NHS England, which was very influenced by this research. Importantly, this name firmly positioned the NHS as integrally involved, not just a supporting partner, which is a crucial decision considering the audience insights we've discussed. I'm just going to take a sip of water. So we worked hard to ensure that the message framework and tone came through strongly via every communications channel and every participant interaction and touch point. the ad campaign, the participant materials, the website, the mobile units themselves. So the proposition that I mentioned, let's detect cancer early, you can see translated to a campaign line that we used on the side of the mobile units, which was this unit could help us detect cancer early, as well as in those adverts and posters that we produced, where the headline text was, this letter could help us detect cancer early. Visually too, we chose warm, restrained colours and simple, uncluttered designs. You can see this was even applied in this bottom left picture to the interior of the units. This was important to ensure a really positive participant experience, to maximise retention and ensure people would feel good about being asked to come back the following year. In fact, I recall when we first unveiled the units on the day that these photos were taken, a senior NHS leader who was present said to me how he felt the units would surprise and delight people, and they would put forward the best version of the NHS. The messaging and tone was carried through to the website too, which was built by our partners, William Joseph, again with extensive user testing to ensure we landed the right messages in the right tone in this digital context and ensured a smooth user experience through to registration. We produced a range of audiovisual assets, including 2 animated films, one for the website and one to be shown in the mobile units as part of the consent process, and a film featuring interviews with lead representatives from the partners behind the trial. I won't show these now for time reasons, but I will quickly show you one of the 4-second GIFs we produced off the back of these animations, which we used on social media. So you can see, hopefully, there it goes. We had a range of those, and it just enabled us to use some quite interactive content. And we used animation in particular to help explain some of the elements of the trial design that were harder for people to grasp using the written word alone. For example, the concept of the control group. It's been crucial from the outset for us to work really closely with the 8 cancer alliances to engage the public, stakeholders, and particularly those health professionals within their regions. And so to support this, similar to the work we did that Emily described, we developed and are continually refining a communications toolkit that those alliances can use to support those communications activities regionally and locally. It's worth highlighting in particular, we've created assets and scripts that can be used by local community leaders and groups whose voice in their communities is trusted, which is an approach we find is especially important among hardly reached audiences. And we achieved a big impact at the launch of the trial in mid-September. We had, frankly, blanket coverage, widespread coverage across national and regional media, and even a significant amount of international media. We did photo calls at both our Cheshire and South East London trial sites with Sarah and Harpal Kumar from Grail, and Amanda Pritchard and Callie Palmer from NHS England, as well as the trial's lead investigators, Charles Swanton, Richard Neal and Peter Sassini, all busy fielding interviews all day, as well as Jodie actually from a CR UK perspective as well. It was an extremely busy day. And the coverage certainly achieved the objective of helping drive awareness of the trial, perhaps even too much. The phones were ringing off the hook, and there was a huge surge in visits to the website, as you can see from these charts, with over 3,500 calls and 11,000 web visits on the launch day. It has calmed down since then, but the good news is that recruitment has continued to go extremely well so far. We have continued with regional and local media and community engagement activities as the trials moved around the 8 regions, and almost all units so far have been fully booked, with over 14,000 participants registered. Our focus now is on trying to ensure we drive up representation on the trial from people from more deprived and ethnic minority backgrounds. And we're actually piloting an initiative in Greater Manchester to couple targeted recruitment and targeted community engagement activity in the Trafford area of Manchester with removing the need for a postal invitation for people living in that part of the city. We'll be doing that between now and January. So this is my final slide. Unquestionably, the star of this trial is the gallery test itself. And if it succeeds, credit for the trial will chiefly lie with Grail, NHS England and the trial team at King's College London. But behaviour change communications has played an important supporting role, drawing out the benefits, meeting information needs and helping overcome barriers. And most of you are probably familiar with the EAST framework from BIT. If we look at this project through that prism, you can see that our insight-led approach has helped make it feel easy to participate by emphasising the low burden on participants, attractive by using salient and striking messages and visuals and ensuring eligibility criteria is prominent in communications to ensure the intended audience quickly identifies it as relevant to them. We've made it feel social by emphasising the opportunity to help the NHS save lives, and that has applied that reciprocity effect I referred to, and taps into people's need for bigger meaning. And also timely by ensuring that the media launch was timed to have maximum impact on recruitment, and staggering subsequent communications activity to be closely mapped to the invitation schedule as the trial moves around England. So that's my final slide. I'm going to hand back to Ben, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. I can see we're already receiving a whole torrent of questions about that, but I would like to first of all turn to Jo Waller for the first question that we've received. Actually, just to remind you who Dr. Jo Waller is. Dr. Jo Waller is a reader in the Cancer Prevention Group, King's College London, and leads a behavioural science team. So one of the questions we received, Jo, is from Ross Kester. His question is, what more do we think is needed specifically to improve uptake of invitations to screening? I mean, that's been throughout this, in particular the work, well, in both presentations actually. Have you got a view on how to drive uptake of invitations specifically, Jo?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to say on this. Firstly, it's not easy. I think if we knew how to do it, we'd have done it a long time ago. Uptake varies across the programmes that are offered at the moment, and it's lowest. Well, I think Ross's question highlights the lung health checks as having very low uptake currently. Colorectal cancer screening has lower uptake than breast and cervix. And there's been some nice work from Katie Robb and colleagues in Glasgow looking at the differential barriers to uptake across programmes. So it's not a one answer for all programmes. There are specific things about the test and about people's perceptions of the different cancers that make the barriers different across those different programmes. So that's one thing to think of. What are the, the specific barriers to bowel screening or to cervical or to breast or to lung? We can think about ways of changing the offer as well as ways of changing the sort of psychology of the people receiving the letters. So I'm sure people will be aware there's a lot of work in cervical screening going on at the moment with regard to HPV self-sampling. So the Big U Screen study in London, which Fanta knows, can probably say more about than me, is looking at whether if we offer people that alternative of a different kind of test, can that have an impact on uptake? And we're very optimistic that it will. Similarly with bowel screening, the switch from the FOBT test to the FIT test means the test is a bit easier for people to do. So those are some of the things we can sort of tweak about the system and the offer that people are getting. And then we can also think about the sort of psychological barriers. And we use a similar model to the one that Emily talked about, where we think about people in different stages of uptake of screening, from being unaware to being perhaps undecided and sort of thinking about that decision. The model we use is the precaution adoption process model, which has an option for people to make a decision not to go for screening, or they can decide that they are going to go or to take part. And then from there, in health psychology, there's the notorious intention behaviour gap, where people can make a decision to do something and then they've actually got to get through that process of doing it. And the barriers and the sort of interventions very much depend on which stage people are at. So as Emily said, and I think someone else might have said the same thing, if people are completely unaware of screening, and our work suggests that a proportion of people are unaware of cervical screening, even though they will have been getting regular invitations, changing something about the wording of the letter or sending them a self-sample kit probably isn't going to help. And that's more about awareness raising and the sort of community engagement that's been going on so successfully in North London. If someone's intending to go but they can't sort of activate that intention into behaviour, then things like self-sampling or flexible appointment times, things to make that process of just booking the appointment or doing the test really easy could be much more effective. And then possibly the difficult group to target are the group who've made an active decision not to attend. And for some of them, that will be an informed choice. And, you know, for some people, screening is just something they don't want to do, and that's fine if they're making that on the basis of good information. For others, it will be because of a previous bad experience or because of some misunderstanding about risk or something that we might be able to address in information materials. And Laura Marlowe and I have been doing work on this for a number of years, trying to see whether we can sort of shift people's perceptions by perhaps giving them more information in the cervical context about HPV and about the risk across the life course to shift beliefs. So I think there's a lot we can do. Just very briefly to touch on lung screening, that is a really particular context. Sammy Quaife at QMUL has been doing some really nice work on this over the last few years, but lung screening has particular barriers because it's just associated with smoking. There's a lot of stigma attached to it. We know that people are really fearful of lung cancer and fatalistic because diagnosis tends to be at a late stage where treatment is ineffective. People have experience of seeing people die of it very quickly. And so there's often a perception that there's no point in picking it up early because it can't be treated, but actually telling people about that stage difference in survival and challenging some of those beliefs hopefully will improve uptake. And yeah, I'd urge you to look at the lung screen uptake trial that Sammy and colleagues have worked on. Shall I stop there?
Thank you, Jo. Can I just selfishly say, if you got any links to some of the things that you touched upon there, Jo, if you would like to drop them into the chat for people to have a look at, that would be fabulous. I would invite everybody who's participating, if you've got questions specifically on anything that Jo's just touched upon there, Jo, you're very welcome to answer those questions in the Q&A directly if you would like to. I'm going to turn, if I may, please, to Fanta. Fanta, just to remind everybody, was working with Emily and with NASA and with the team on the North London Cancer Alliance programme. Fanta, we had a question specifically about what someone's put into quotation marks about hardly reached groups. And I know this is a priority for so many people. In fact, I'm going to ask the same question to Ian and Sarah in a minute as well, because this is a priority for their work as well. So what groups did you specifically put in that category of hardly reached in your work? And how did you reach them? What are the techniques and methods that you've learned and you may be able to share with us about this hardly reached challenge? Fanta.
Thank you for that, Ben. So I think firstly is that one of our patient reps has told us to stop using that terminology because a lot of people don't really like it. So we've been going with diverse communities, which I think is probably a lot more representative of what we're trying to say. So it's a challenge. And I think in our campaign, we probably were not targeted to that level because we recognized that we needed to reach out to, across our population of NCL. So we couldn't really go down to that level. However, the work that we were doing with the VCS organizations was picking up on some of that because we purposefully looked at organizations that were doing specific work with certain communities that we know that typically don't turn up for screening or probably take a little bit longer to present to their GP if they have any concerning symptoms. So that was one way that we approached it. But in terms of our work generally, we recently completed a piece of work where we did a very in-depth data analysis of the screening data that we have, the GP practices hold. Now, unsurprising to some people that might have tried doing this, GP data is very variable in terms of the quality of it, but we were able to do some really good analysis around bowel and cervical screening. And that allowed us to really hone in on the specific wards, specific practices and the age groups, ethnicity, languages spoken, the age breakdown as well, that we needed to draw out and look at which particular populations we need to do some more targeted interventions with. So I'll definitely recommend doing that sort of data analysis. And I think, the work that we've started with the voluntary organizations, I would say is really valuable. It takes time for this sort of thing to mature and for you to see the fruits of your labor. But I think you cannot underestimate the sort of legacy and the fruits that you can get out of it if you continue doing doing that work. I mean, community development takes years for you to really see the benefits of it. So I would encourage people to take that sort of approach. We are planning to extend this work with the volunteer organizations through doing some specific community development projects in the future, but that's yet to come through.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Fanta. I think Emily said, about the legacy point, avoiding, I think you used the words flash in the pan, Emily. So we've got to avoid a flash in the pan. And I must say that is something that a lot of communications campaigns end up being, actually. So it's really refreshing to see that this approach has tried to avoid that. Is there anything you'd like to add, Emily, before I'm going to back the ball over to Ian and Sarah?
No, no. Thanks for asking, but no.
Emily loves it when I just bat the ball to her without giving her any heads up on that.
I could, but I won't.
Ian and Sarah, I don't know who's going to field it exactly, but I know that this reaching diverse groups, representative sample sets is a priority for Gallery. Would you like to say anything about this? Ian, why don't you begin?
Shall I begin, Sarah? I'll go, and if I miss anything important, then please do add to it. Yeah, I was just listening to what Fanta was saying about the language used, and I mean, the most common terminology in the past used to be hard to reach, and then yes, some among us in an attempt to sort of try and use better languages started to say hardly reached. But there's also diverse communities, as Fanta said, there's underrepresented groups, there's seldom heard, there's lots of different ways of calling it, but whatever term you use, they're all united by our failure in kind of public sector, not-for-profit sector mainly, to find effective ways to engage. And the burden is on us to address that, but we can only do that by listening and engaging with those groups, in fact, the last event we did was all about co-design, and that's increasingly a useful technique to apply to try and to work iteratively with those groups to try and find solutions by involving them in the process. As Fanta says, it takes time to do it well, and with the NHS Gallery project, that's exactly what we're trying to do, in particular in Greater Manchester at the moment, is to invest time in building relationships through the right channels and partners, existing groups on the ground who know these audiences well. And for the purposes of NHS Gallery, we've defined the priority groups for this, not the only groups, but the priority groups for this, as those who are living in more deprived communities and or are from ethnic minority groups, so we're working with those organizations on the ground who already have relationships, already trusted voices, to try to engage appropriately, because we know from the research we've done that trust is one of the biggest issues, and they have no relationship with Grail, and to some extent have no reason to have a relationship with NHS England nationally either. And so although NHS comes with an existing element of trust, those relationships on the ground are really key to trying to overcome those trust barriers.
Thank you, Ian. Sarah, would you like to add to that?
I would just reiterate the point about being in it for the long term. I think, if we've learned anything about behaviour change over the years, it's been that you can't zoom in and do a campaign for a few weeks or months and then zoom out again and expect it to have any lasting effect, if indeed any effect at all. And I think this, building from the ground up is what has been really, really critical to so many of the programmes that we've seen across cancer, and learning from each other as well. For the NHS Gallery trial, as Ian's talked a lot about what we're doing to work with communities. We've also applied as many other methods as we can to try and ensure that our trial population is as representative as of the population as possible. So right from the invitations that we send out in the first place, so we are over enriching in our invitations to certain postcodes, and obviously we're able to do that working through NHS Digitrials on the invitations in the areas where we know we'll get poorest uptake. So if we're only getting one person in every 50 responding to their invitations. We're sending, 50 times as many invitations to those areas. At the same time, the use of our mobile clinics that rove around the different areas and are very much targeted at these areas with higher diversity and concentration of ethnic minority groups has really helped as well, because we are then more local for them. We're making it as convenient as possible for them to attend their appointment. So at every stage of the way, from the invitation to the way that the intervention is given, from the language that we use, we've translated certain of our materials into different languages, the most commonly used languages, and the animations that Ian showed as well in the films. That they don't necessarily rely on understanding of language to be able to help to get informed consent. So I think there are so many different approaches that we can take, but as you've heard, it's no one size fits all.
Thank you, Sarah. We've had quite a lot of questions on this theme of inclusion and diversity. There's just one more that I'd like to give to Emily and to Fanta before I ask a question to Jodie about some resourcing and money stuff. The question, Fanta, I think I just sent it through to you, is when we talk about barriers to uptake in minority ethnic communities, are there any recurring themes that you may have noticed as professionals, or would you say that these challenges vary to specific cultural groups? Are there any recurring things that we as behaviour change comms people could learn from across different groups? Fanta, you're off mute, so I'm going for you first, but I'll go to Emily after.
I'm assuming it's uptake to screening rather than just presentation based on symptomatic pathways. So I think it's basically what Joe mentioned earlier. It really depends on the screening program, because the challenges that people face, or the barriers that people face, are really specific to the screening program. There are some aspects which are, let's say, cultural, because people may feel that, for instance, the bowel screening test, when we're using the FOB test, it was not very sanitary, and some people struggle with that. And for that reason, we saw what the uptake was like compared to when we switched over to the FOB test, which is a little bit easier today. And then, in terms of cervical screening as well, there are some cultural beliefs around, people not, I suppose, seeing some parts of your body, particularly if the individual doesn't have, specific symptoms that are concerning, which means that they need to be investigated. So, if you're well, there's no really any real reason why you should be attending to do those sort of tests. But yeah, I think it really varies. I think language is something that definitely comes up across the board for people that don't speak English as a first language. I think our invitation materials are not immediately obvious that they're available in other languages and how people can access them. That came up recently, actually yesterday, in a discussion around breast screening. So that's certainly an opportunity for us to address. But yeah, I think it really varies according to the screening programs.
So thank you. I'd like to just tip in here personally as well. My experience has been there are some very practical, obvious things that you've touched upon already about translation. I think that messenger matters even more when you're working with minorities, whatever type of minorities, in order to drive up trust. That messenger effect is more pronounced with minority groups, I would suggest. And the final thing I would say is, based on the work that we have been doing recently in a non-health setting around the Grenfell Tower, where we have been asked to ensure that diverse voices are included in what happens with the tower at Grenfell. The mantra that we have used is fish where the fish are, meaning we have to be proactive to get out to where they are and not expect anybody to come and drop in on us. Previously at the Grenfell Tower, there was use of kind of drop-in offices where we would open the office, and if people want to say something about the tower, you just drop in, come on in. And now things have moved on from there. We've realized that we need to go to where they are, whether it's online or in in the real world, and that will obviously vary a great deal according to different groups. But that mantra again draws into what Ian was saying. The onus is on us as people designing this stuff and spending this money to make it happen and be proactive, rather than just expecting other people to come to us. I'll just tip in there. I've got a question. I know in the interest of time, I was going to move to Jodie. We received a question from, I didn't say who it was, the name of the person, but it's from Australia. I did say we've gone global with this. It says that lots of research funding went to COVID and funds for breast cancer research were reduced. That COVID had diverted funds away from cancer awareness. And the question is, has this been a similar experience here in the UK? If so, how are we going to maintain this work and do this work? So I wondered, Jodie, if you had any information about that, really.
So certainly COVID has had a huge impact on charitable research funders such as Cancer Research UK. We lost a number of our fundraising channels, and we have had to make very difficult decisions about the research that we're funding. But we are not, this has not deterred us from our cause, our mission to beat cancer. And I think actually it's been a really rallying call to the community to come together. And, you know, Sarah and I have been in this area for quite some time. And I think if we were doing this 10 years ago, we wouldn't have seen this participant list as big, all of these roles that exist out in the community. And it's absolutely tremendous to see. And it calls us all, you know, in these hard times to actually think about how do we best use the resource that we have available, financial and otherwise, to create the biggest impact. And I think your event here of bringing people together and sharing and exchanging and building, keep moving forward rather than looking backwards is the way to do that. So absolutely, we will continue to drive improvements for people with cancer. And I think so much of what we do also has the potential to impact health more broadly than that too. So ultimately, together is how we'll do this.
That is a wonderful way to sort of rally us as we get to the end of this. I'm going to very cruelly just do a quick fire last question, one question, the same question to everybody here. And I'll ask you to answer it just in one line. And the question that I would like to ask is, for people who want to do more behaviour change communications in this field, what is your number one piece of advice that they should focus on to, or your rallying call to them? What is your advice to them to make that a success and to use more behaviour change communications in the future? What should they focus on to make it happen? I'm being cruel here, so I'm going to start with Ian. I can pick on Ian. He's a big boy. Go ahead, Ian.
I think start with the audience. So you've got to understand what change you're trying to affect. Be as specific as possible about that. The broader you make your objectives, the more woolly they are, the less likely it is you'll have impact in achieving them. So start with very clear objectives and really understand the audience that you're trying to speak to and what are the barriers and the motivations that you're dealing with around that behavior you're trying to affect. Often we talk about the COM-B model. So think about capability, opportunity, motivation of those audiences.
Brilliant, thank you. Start with the audiences, use the COM model. I'll move to Emily, please.
For me, it's all about the messenger, because if you've got a strong relationship with somebody or something, you will listen to what it's saying. So I think the listen to your audience point is really, really important, and your audience will tell you who they're going to listen to.
Brilliant. Messenger. Sarah, please.
Of course, this gets more difficult the further down the list you go, because the most obvious answers come first. So to try and build on that, I would then maybe advise people to find out what's been done before with their audience, look for the evidence of what works.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to go Fanta, Jodie, and then finish with Joe. Fanta, please.
For me, it's joint working. I think it's drawing across your sector and engaging the different partners that have an ability to make an impact on the campaign.
Right. So we've got partnerships, we've got what works, we've got messenger, we've got audience. This is getting harder. I can see Joe, you're scribbling out all your ideas. Countdown. Jodie, go ahead.
So I'm going with the message. I think this is about being really clear on what the need is here and going into it with your eyes open so that you're as sure as you can be that what you're actually going to do is actually going to drive and achieve the impact that you're after.
Pre-testing and getting that message right and getting that proposition right. Thank you very much, Jodie. And finally, Joe.
Sarah stole mine. I think I'd sort of reinforce the fact that use the evidence that's out there. Don't reinvent the wheel and start assuming that no one has ever tried to do this before, because of course lots of us have. There's a wealth of academic literature, and those of us who are working in academia on this are never more delighted than if someone approaches us and wants to know what we would advise or what we know from our research. And then, I mean, Cancer Research UK has a toolkit website with lots of resources for increasing uptake of different screening programs. And so, yeah, just trying to look at what's out there before you start. And I guess co-production might be the other thing to mention.
Well, we could talk about that, absolutely. Thank you, Joe. We will compile useful links, like the last link that you mentioned, to the Cancer Research UK toolkit, and we will put that into our email that we're going to send around to everybody who registered for the event. I'm really humbled and grateful to everybody who's contributed to this, and just want to say thank you really for everything that you've done. I hope it was useful to the participants. I'd like to finish just by acknowledging as well from Emily's presentation, where she put the voice or some quotations from two people there. There were Mary and Kofi, I think, were the two people there. And it was, while I was writing down, it's a reminder that as professionals, we have all these numbers and data, and we get used to the subject matter. But I think what I saw from looking at those two individuals, with Mary and Kofi, was the human impact on the individuals and all the families of the work. And I'm really, again, humbled to participate in that and to make a difference. But thank you, everybody. We have had, I think our high watermark was 120 participants online. We're finishing 1 minute over time. Apologies for that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks for participating.
Thank you. Bye-bye.